national piece that he wrote about the officiating. There's been an interesting change there. I'm going to get into that. And it will be my last time talking to John in 2015. He joins me now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. How are you, sir?
Doing well. I hope you're well rested, Mike.
I'm well rested, but I've been ill the last couple of days. I've been battling this. Remember on Tuesday we were at the Golden Nugget, and right around 4:30 I had said to you, man, it just like all of a sudden hit me. Well, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's still hanging around.
Luckily, I'm still healthy, so whatever bug got you hasn't gotten me yet.
Yeah, it got me pretty good. So I was sitting on the couch the last couple of days. But in that time, a lot of things surfaced and on my mind. I want to start off with your piece that you wrote nationally about the officiating. Now, I didn't hear about this. I wasn't really diving into a lot of stuff, but I saw the tweet today. It's my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that in the playoffs, the officials can basically be overruled by the eye in the sky. Is that is that understanding correct?
A little bit yes, a little bit no. What they can do is kind of fix administration errors is what they call it. So whether it's a clock problem, if an official on field gets that wrong, Dean Blandino from New York can kind of take over and correct it. If it's a down and distance issue, so some of that kind of stuff, they've taken the next step and said if officials need help in New York, they can get it. They're still claiming that there's not going to be any overturning of judgment calls, and a lot of people already believe, as I mentioned in my column, Mike Pereira, for one, who obviously was the predecessor to Dean Blandino in the league office, believes he's already been in their ears. And if that's the case, that's a problem because, as I said, I don't think there's been a year where the officiating has been lower regarded than it has been this year.
No, and we know a couple of years ago we had the replacements, and some of the fight was they wanted to be full-time. Does that get brought up, I guess, rediscussed the next time? Or I don't know how long that contract's for, but is that something that needs to be reconsidered?
I've been trumpeting that for over a decade, so I hope so, but others have said there's just not enough work to do, and I've never bought that argument. I think it's ludicrous for an industry that now breaks in over $10 billion a year to have part-time officials. I mean, think about just the absurdity of that on the face of it. I mean, these guys have other professions, and they're making these decisions on each and every Sunday that sometimes decide games. And if you take it a step further, obviously when coaches lose enough, they lose their jobs, their support staff lose their jobs. These are people's livelihoods. And I can't believe people are so nonchalant on just how important these people are to the game, and there's plenty of work to do. They could be watching film in the off season. As I said, they could be attending each and every OTA practice across the country. You could have a group of officials, and that would be twofold. It would enable the players to get used to how the officials are going to call the game, so it would, in theory, make things a lot cleaner because the players themselves would understand what's going to be implemented at game time. And players always talk about, what do they say? How do players get better? Repetition. Coaches will tell you every single day, repetition, repetition, repetition. If the officials are getting repetition, stands to theorize that they get better.
Yeah, no, I think it's ludicrous as well to say there's not enough work for them. You can make work for them. You can create things for them to do, as you said, have film to study, do some sitting down with the teams in the offseason, OTA stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And look, if it's about there's not enough work for them to do, pay them like teachers, pay them like the players. You don't have to pay them in the offseason. Pay them their portion of full-time salary during, maybe they don't have to work. Maybe they get the year off, but let them focus on that being their one and only thing, because you're right. The NFL has really, I think, John, this year more so than ever, and I know when you're in the moment of something, it's always say it's the worst ever, but I can't remember ever talking about the poor officiating week in and week out on multiple games, not just one that you just happen to be watching, multiple games. It's bad.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is the problem goes far larger than the officials. I believe it or not, even after what I just said, I think by and large they do a pretty good job. This is a very difficult sport to officiate. I think the larger problem is the rule book and the over legislation of the game, because Dean Blandino argued a couple of weeks ago. He sends out a video every Friday to members of the media to sort of clarify things for us. And a couple of weeks ago on that video, he said there's an average, I believe, of 4.3 mistakes per game, where if you think about it, how many games are in, how many plays are in each game, that's not very much. And to me, that speaks to the larger issue, though. What the NFL is saying officials are getting right, these ticky-tack penalties, sort of like illegal contact down the field, holding, defensive holding down the field, offensive or defensive pass interference. These are the plays that the average fan can't stand because they're ticky-tack, but the NFL says they're correct. In their eyes, it's not a mistake. But when you're watching the game, it's very, very frustrating because the average fan, the casual fan, just doesn't agree that that kind of thing is a penalty. So there's a disconnect. Blandino's right in saying there hasn't been an upgrade in errors. It's just the product itself has been hurt by the fact of the rules that the NFL has legislated.
It's John McMullen with me here, and of course, 97.3ESPN.com is where you can find more of John's stuff, including his 5 on the Cardinals. Before we talk about the Cardinals and your pick, you wrote that the Eagles missed the boat on Bruce Arians, and I think it's been an interesting story throughout the week. You know, here's a guy who in 2012 was the coach of the year as as an interim. Basically, a lot of people thought that he did the best job taking over for Pagano there. And then in 2013, he's a free agent, and not a lot of people put him high on the list because of his age. You know, it was kind of like, well, how long is he going to be here? Do you think that the Eagles would be in a better spot today with Bruce Arians as their head coach?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, hindsight is 20/20. He's a better football coach than Chip Kelly. I don't think there's any question about that right now. He's proven it. I think if you look at how he's built the Arizona Cardinals, they're one of the best teams in football, and I think the front office would be in better shape because he's not a guy who would have pulled that power play, and you would still have the situation where you would have a clearer picture as far as personnel went with the traditional general manager on down. So I think in a lot of ways it would have improved the situation here. But you're right. The Eagles had scheduled an interview with him. I think a lot of people forget that. And they kind of were only doing it, though, because he was a hot name. They weren't really interested. So they wanted to make that sort of appearance that they were doing their due diligence. And once it looked like Chicago was going to hire him, they kind of bowed out, and they used that as an excuse, and they canceled the interview. And it was really because they had never had any interest in bringing him in the first place. Chicago went a different direction. A very similar situation to Philadelphia, in that the Bears' general manager at the time was Phil Emery. And to be blunt, he wanted to bolster his reputation around the league. And he went sort of the innovation route, as I say it, and took Mark Trestman out of the CFL. It was an egregious mistake. Jeffrey Lurie had it in his mind that offseason. He wanted an innovator, and that's why he focused in on Chip Kelly. And obviously, Kelly at first turned him down, and that's when they were going to turn to Gus Bradley. And then all of a sudden the sanctions popped in Oregon. They were looming, and he changed his mind and came here. But as I wrote my column on 973ESPN.com, I think a lot of people confuse innovation with new, and new doesn't necessarily mean innovative.
Yeah, it's a good point, John. But, you look back to that time, if Chip Kelly was available and they hired Bruce Arians, it probably at the time would not have gone over very well, would it?
I'm not sure about that. I'm really not, because as you mentioned, Bruce Arians was the coach of the year. I mean, he was very highly regarded, and obviously he has a history in Philadelphia because of his roots at Temple. I understand what you're saying because Chip Kelly was the sexier name, But I think it would have been an easy public relations job to sell Bruce Arians to the people of Philadelphia. I really do. So I think that's kind of revisionist history for the people that want to say the Eagles made the right decision and they couldn't have sold it. I mean, this was the NFL Coach of the Year. How could you not? How could you not sell that?
Well, and I think at the time, did his age play a factor? I mean, a lot of people kind of backed off of him.
Yeah, you're right. That's part of it. And we've talked about ageism in a number of different sectors in sports, and it's real. And sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's not. I think it's proven it wasn't legitimate in this case. Other than Bill Belichick, who's far and away number one, I don't think there's a more well-respected coach in professional football right now than Bruce Arians.
And he's a great personality, too.
He's a tremendous personality. Anybody who saw the recent NFL Network special on him knows his players love him. They'd run through walls for him, and that's sort of because he'd do the same for them. And it's easy to play hindsight, and I'm not trying to criticize the Eagles for not making the decision, because they're not the only team that would have chosen Chip Kelly over Bruce Arians. Far from it. But I think it's clear that we look back, and if we're being honest, they made the wrong decision.
We're talking Eagles-Cardinals and the NFL with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. We'll dive into all of the NFC East matchups this weekend. You also write at 97.3 ESPN.com that, Sam Bradford addressed his future on Wednesday and Thursday, and I'm sure you and Pete and Scott all talked about this the last couple of days, but, I want to kind of ask you a couple of questions on that as well. You have said that you don't think he'll be back, but I want to ask you, do you think Bradford holds the cards here?
I think as of today, he holds the cards. I think it's a fluid situation. It could change drastically in the 3 weeks. I told Pete and Scott that a couple of days ago. If the Eagles finish this season off with 3 straight losses, for instance, he no longer holds the cards. So, I think that's been this situation throughout the year. There's been a lot of wild gesticulations and the turns and back and forth, because early when Bradford wasn't playing well, people would say, well, there's no way he can be brought back. Now that he is playing well, there's some people that say he's 100% coming back. And I don't either side doesn't have to make a decision right now, obviously, and things could change drastically. If the Eagles go on to win 3 straight, for instance, in a home playoff game, it's going to be very difficult to not franchise Sam Bradford or let him move on. On the other hand, as I said, if they lose 3 straight and miss the playoffs and play horribly down the stretch, it's easy to walk away. So, to me, I've always been, as you know, steadfast. He's not a fit for this offense. Win, lose, or draw. He's just not a fit. Yeah. And I think it's a very hard thing for me to picture Chip Kelly going all in on this guy for 4 or 5 years in a long-term contract.
Yeah, the 4 or 5
some time.
Yeah, the 4 or 5 thing is tough. I think if they both can agree to a 3, that might be the best scenario. However, like you just said, can he buy some time in other ways, or is he going to get an offer 5-6 years someplace else?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the Clevelands of the world. This is a quarterback-starved league, and he's shown enough, especially if you project him in more of a traditional pro offense, that certainly in a league that struggles to find quarterbacks, he deserves to be a starter in this league. He might be more valuable to other organizations.
Yeah, the one interesting thing is, John, and I know quarterback's a very hard spot to find, but going through the list of teams, I don't know how many teams have a legitimate ability or need to change. We counted earlier in the 2 o'clock hour. I've got like 6 teams maybe, and I'm counting like Matthew Stafford leaving Detroit. I don't know that there's going to be a lot of teams in urgent need to make that big-time offer.
No, but it only takes a few, and there's always a few. And we already saw last year that Cleveland had some – that would be the number one spot to me, because I don't believe for 1 second that they're going to move forward with Johnny Manziel next season after all the problems. And remember, there's going to be a regime change. There's going to be a new head coach. There's going to be a new general manager. So I think they're going to want to start from square one. And that's an organization that has struggled so mightily at the top, not just in administration, but also at that particular position. So that would be one team. And it doesn't take 10 or 11. It only takes one to create a bidding war. And once you start talking about $20 million, to me it makes a lot of sense to franchise Sam Bradford and buy one more year if you don't have other options. But that means $20 million. And a lot of people think he's already overpaid at $13 million. And that's a lot to invest in that particular position. So I keep going back to the elephant in the room, which to me is Colin Kaepernick. If he's available, no one has given me any indication that first he's available or that Chip would be interested. But common sense says that's the type of skill set he wants in this offense, not Sam Bradford's. And that's just the reality of the situation. So if he's out there, why wouldn't you make a play for him?
All right, John, let's look at the NFC East games and what they look like. Washington's at home against Buffalo. Buffalo doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to play for, but their season is virtually on the line. They look like a team ready to just completely combust last week against Philadelphia. Washington, obviously a much-needed win on the road. Give them credit for that. Now they come back home where they've been pretty good. Does Washington keep things interesting with a win this week?
I think they do get weak, and I think they do keep it interesting. You hit the nail on the head with Buffalo. To me, they look very undisciplined and perhaps ready to just kind of give up on Rex Ryan in this season. It was a very, very poorly run game, poorly run team, just a mental mistake against the Eagles, and I think that continues this week. They're certainly a more talented group than Washington, but they were a more talented group than the Eagles. So the Redskins as a whole, until the recent hiccup, which if they look back on this season, that loss to Dallas is really, really going to haunt them because they had been playing it well at home before that, and I think they get back on the right track.
All right, New York going to play, obviously, a very interesting game for the Giants because they're taking on an undefeated Carolina team, and everybody just kind of assuming two things. One, New York has been this team all the time. It seemingly wins a game like this against an undefeated team. It seems that they are the one team that rose to the occasion against the Patriots even this year. Carolina, you know, they can afford a loss. They got some injuries. Stewart's going to miss the game. Does this week set up nicely for the Giants, or are they just not a good enough football team at home to beat Carolina?
Well, the one part that sets up nicely is that the Panthers don't really need the game. Other than that, you're right. This is not the old Giants. Unless Michael Strahan and Justin Tucker showing up, that's the kind of group that would beat the undefeated Patriots. This group is not nearly the same as that. It really boils down to Eli Manning throwing the football to Odell Beckham Jr., who's a tremendous player, but they just don't have enough talent. I've been saying it all year, defensively, up front, and that continues. And I can't imagine the Carolina Panthers, the way they played this season, losing this football game. But as we know, with the Eagles, as astonishing as it is, 2 6-7 teams playing meaningful football in Week 15, as we said, neither has to win this game. It really doesn't matter. Because if they take care of business from that point forward, they could still win the division.
Yeah. All right, let's look at Philly and Arizona. You got 5 on Arizona. What are the things in your research for that team that stood out about this Arizona team that's 11-2? Great head coach, Carson Palmer probably in the MVP race, a resurgent Larry Fitzgerald. What stands out?
What stands out offensively is their vertical game. They just love to get the football down the field. They have tremendous talent at the wide receiver position, and Carson Palmer's really good at getting it down the field. So even last week when they just beat Minnesota had a tremendous pass rush in that game, really, really pressured Palmer consistently, still got it down the field, still had 2 big plays that essentially won the game for the Cardinals. So even when they're not playing all that well, the threat of the home run ball is always looming. And the thing about these receivers, especially Fitzgerald, who's morphed into more of a slot guy later in his career, and Michael Floyd, John Brown handle the outside stuff. they all have great hands. So even when they're not open, Palmer trusts them enough to get the football to try to, throw those 50-50 balls. And a lot of times, we were talking about officiating earlier. Even if you defend the play, all of a sudden this pass interference call comes in, and you're giving up 45 yards down the field. And if you think about the Eagles this week and the fact that Byron Maxwell and Eric Rowe are going to play, but they're both struggling with ankle injuries, if styles make fights, this just isn't a great style matchup for the Eagles.
Big X plays. They throw the ball down the field. They blitz a lot, do the Cardinals. We'll see this game happen right here on 97.3 ESPN. By the way, John will give us pick in just a moment. John, I have 2 extra seats for the Sixers game tonight. I would love for you to sit with me.
1 in 26. If I wasn't going out with my wife, I would gladly take you up on that, Mike. Just to see the new regime, as Mike D'Antoni is getting ready to set foot in Philadelphia, to be the eyes and the ears for the boss.
Yikes.
2,000 miles away.
All right, Eagles Cardinals Sunday night. What do you got?
I got the Cardinals winning 31-20. I just think they're too talented, and as well as the Eagles have been playing over the past couple of weeks, I think this is a bad matchup for them on both sides of the football. And at the end of the day, though, it's not the end of the world. If the Eagles lose this game, as most expect, they're still in it. It doesn't hurt them really much at all. They just have to win out. And if they win out from there, beat Washington at home and beat the Giants on the road, they're still the NFC East champion.
All right, John has more on this week's game, 5 on the Cardinals, his piece on Sam Bradford. Fletcher Cox, really good read there as well. Check them all out at 97.3 ESPN.com. And he, along with Scott Grayson, will be at Sunday Night Football in Philadelphia. Make sure you read all the quick hits and Grayson's grades on the website Sunday evening, Monday morning. All right, man, have a happy New Year, happy holidays, and I will see you in 2016.
Hey, enjoy it, Mike.